Hey y'all, welcome back to Bowls with the Bard. My name is Kings. I am your host, and today we're here with Fawzia Istrabadi to talk about a translation of Romeo and Juliet. Fawzia, before we get started, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Fawzia. I'm a Shakespeare actor, and this Romeo and Juliet is a concept that I've had for a really long time, and it's evolved a lot. What it currently is now, it's in collaboration with Prague Shakespeare Company and their artistic director, Guy Roberts, and ShakeSphere, which is a theater company based in Cairo, and their artistic director, Adham. Yeah, I'm half-Iraqi, which is where my interest in like Arabic Shakespeare comes from. And it's sort of a fun fact, but also is my Iraqi grandmother was an expert on the translations of Shakespeare into Arabic, and she taught like Shakespearean drama at the University of Baghdad and the University of the UAE. And she met Queen Elizabeth on her visit to the UAE. So we like to joke that like being a Shakespearean runs in the family.
Yeah, wow, what a cool history to
Yeah.
have. Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have you here. Before we dive into talking more about your translation, I'm gonna get a little high, and it looks like you've got a little something to
Yep.
drink. Sweet. All right, y'all, we are back and we are going to talk about this Romeo and Juliet translation. So, you've told me the translation was done by your friend, is it Adam?
Adham.
Adham, thank you. What exactly like have the two of you done with this translation?
In this version, I did a cut of Romeo and Juliet that I was trying to get because we did it as a staged reading. I'm there are like three or four different versions of this, but this is how it's worked each time. And I'm going to focus on the stage reading, but I can also talk about the other versions because we've got some really cool things that are coming out of the other versions. But the way that we do it is I usually we'll cut the script, whether to whatever level, and then I'll go through it and I'll highlight the sections that I like, the lines that I would like in Arabic or how I see it in my brain. And I always, as the native speaker, I always give him rein to go, actually, it should be this way. And I usually like will specifically note like cultural things, or since we've also not only made Juliet and the Capulets speak Arabic, we've also made the Muslims. So like, Friar Lawrence, now Imam Lawrence. I'm really bad at referring to him as Imam Lawrence, even though I'm the one who made that shift. So I will probably still call him Friar Lawrence, but noting like religious references that need to change. Sometimes it's easy, like I will just go in and change it to like mosque instead of church. But there are some like exclamations that I'm like, I don't know what the equivalent would be in Arabic in an Islamic setting. So I will note it for him to adjust to whatever that might be. Yeah, so that's usually how we do it.
Awesome. Why did y'all pick Romeo and Juliet for this project?
So Romeo and Juliet is, I've had this concept of a Muslim Capulet family and a Catholic Montague family for a really long time. Like I was in my directing class in undergrad. I did like a project on it, and it's evolved a lot since then. So I've had the concept for a long time. Ultimately, I really want to start a Shakespeare company that is specifically for theater artists of the SWANA diaspora, not just necessarily specifically like Arabs and Arabic. Like that's me and that's part of my identity. So that's why that's where it's starting. But like I want to open it up to this very like people from that region, people of that diaspora, slightly more generally. And I sort of mentioned this to Guy the first time I went to Prague, and we started talking more about it. And so then I went back the following, that was in the winter of 21, 22. And then I went back summer 2022 and we started more seriously talking about it. And he was like, all right, what production ideas do you have? Because like often that's a really good way to like get ideas like this off the ground. And I sort of went through because I have a list of a few things. And the last one I had like more recent ideas, and he was like, that one doesn't quite work. My second one was I had thoughts about a Richard III, and there already is an Arabic Richard III, an Arab tragedy by, I think it's Suleiman al-Bassam. So he was my idea was different, but he was like, it's too similar. And then I was like, well, I have a Pericles, and he was like, you can't do Pericles. No one knows Pericles. Although he and his wife, like, I know Pericles is very special to guys. So he was like, I love Pericles. No one else knows Pericles. We can't do that. And I was like, oh, fine, one day. And then I was like, well, I have this Romeo and Juliet, and I started talking to him about that, and he was like, that's it. It's Romeo and Juliet. So that's why, and I think it works really well. It's for a lot of reasons Romeo and Juliet, but it's helpful because we are sort of testing the concept of like bilingual Shakespeare, where often currently a lot of our audience doesn't know Arabic, and it's I don't quite want to say cheating, but for lack of a better word, it's cheating a little because the audience almost certainly does know the story of Romeo and Juliet. So if something gets lost literally in translation, like they will inherently fill in the gap.
Huh. That's a really smart way to approach that, because you're absolutely right. I feel like even if you don't read actual Romeo and Juliet, like you experience the story through like Nomeo and Juliet or something else. Like everybody knows the basis. That is
Yeah.
a great reason.
Yeah. And I did try, like, as I was marking through it, my goal was, and it's had to adjust based off of, like, the text had to adjust based off of how many, like, native speakers or how many people were comfortable speaking Arabic. But my goal was, and this is, Billy Shakes did me a solid. He likes to repeat plot points. I did make sure that in the text we had, in like without any changes to it, all like major plot points were said in English and in Arabic. So like theoretically, someone who my goal was that theoretically someone who only spoke Arabic, who just randomly came to see this thing, who knew nothing about Romeo and Juliet, could come in and understand everything that was going on, even if they didn't understand the English. And I mean, vice versa for the English as well. But yeah.
That's awesome. I love the idea that like it's storytelling that is accessible to like multiple parties. And it's a story that is somewhat about like there's some divisiveness, but like how do we come together? Um, that's really cool.
Thank you.
Of course. So I think my big question of the day is like, I feel like there is a camp of people out there who you say, I'm going to translate Shakespeare, and they're like, fuck that. Like, Shakespeare is about the rhythm, Shakespeare is about the language. Like, that's going to get lost in translation. What's the point? So I'm interested in like what you would have to say to people who like hold those opinions.
Well, my first thing would be something that Dr. Ralph Allen Cohen said to us on the first day of grad school at orientation, which was, Shakespeare's dead. We're all Shakespeare now. So I'm like, if founder of the American Shakespeare Center, Dr. Ralph Allen Cohen, says that, I feel like everyone else can chill out. But just like generally, but specifically with the translation is, and I haven't actually like tapped out some of the Arabic, but Arabic is inherently a very poetic language. So there is a level at which the Shakespeare and the Arabic goes together really well, even if the meter doesn't quite match, which sometimes it can, I think. Again, I haven't actually like tapped it out, because I've sort of said something similar to Adham once, and he was like, you would be surprised. But it is, again, inherently like a rhythmic, almost, it can be like a very like musical, poetic language. And I think that's helpful. And obviously, like, Arabic poetry is known for being very like gorgeous and thoughtful. And what I have found, like, doing it as an actor, sometimes there are lines that are more like, I don't know how to say it other than like they taste better in your mouth saying them than they do in English. Like some of the balcony, and gallop apace, I would rather say in Arabic than English, because it's just like there's something about the sound coming out that feels like it matches the emotion more. And so, yeah, like that's sort of my response to that, is they actually do go together quite well. Another thing that's actually really cool that Adham did, and I didn't fully notice until he was going over some of the Arabic with me, is there are some rhyming couplets that he kept. And we like there were a few times working on it, I had to kill my darlings because it was like you could really try to drill this into your brain and say it like the way that it's supposed to, or you could just, but he kept the rhyming couplets and the like rhyme as much as he could.
Oh, that's so cool. I would love to
Yeah.
hear that. I guess on the flip side of that question, like, I feel like in the TikToks that I've seen you post about this, like, there has been this, like, warm, fuzzy, like, coming home feeling about them. And I am interested in, like, what value you have had or have found, both you and your collaborators, in like working to put this up on stage.
Yeah, I think like for me personally, again, it's my grandmother was an expert on the translations of Shakespeare into Arabic, and I like to think that she probably like were she here, she probably have some opinions because we've it's the translation we've used. Because in Arabic there's like Fusha, which is like classical Arabic, which is sort of like Shakespeare equivalent. Is like it's the type that you'll like read in a newspaper that's like Fusha is always the same. So that way, because obviously there's a lot of different dialects of Arabic. We have opted to Adham is Egyptian, and we have opted to translate it into modern Egyptian. So, which is a little more like colloquial and would be more readily understandable to us, at least someone who speaks the Egyptian dialect. So, like she would probably have an opinion about that. But for me personally, it's a way of like connecting with that part of like my personal history, but also just I feel like I don't often see, just like generally in theater, consistent like SWANA Arab Middle Eastern representation. And there absolutely is like Middle Eastern American theater, like there absolutely is. But it feels like it, and there are theaters that are dedicated like more generally to Middle Eastern playwrights in the States. But I feel like specifically within the like Shakespeare and classical world, it's a piece that is missing a bit. And so my desire is to help fill that gap and to also, sorry, brain is loading. um, we've had a lot of like most of the people who have worked, most of the like Americans who have worked on this are Arab American, and so we're members of the diaspora. We have Fetty, who was our Tybalt and Friar John this last go round, and who is wonderful, is Egyptian, and so he was having the easiest time at the stage reading. So because he's a native speaker and it's his dialect, so he was having the easiest time. But I think for all of us, there's a level of like getting to reconnect with our roots in that way on stage in a way that we very often don't get to. And I think it's just very special to get to do that with other Arab American actors. Because like even in my MFA cohort, like as Theseus, I've asked my directors and they said yes, of course, because they originally we have two Mexican actors who are Oberon and Puck who speak in Spanish to each other. And so I asked if I could do that, if I could like make a point to have Theseus speak in Arabic a little bit, specifically like terms of endearment, like specifically when my Theseus is a queen, is speaking to Hippolyta. And they said yes, of course. And so that's been great, but there's something very special about like getting to put it on stage with other Arab actors in a way that I know is also special to them. And it feels like we're all getting to celebrate that part of ourselves together.
Yeah, I find it so cool. When I found out you were doing this, I feel I have heard of a lot of like international translations of Shakespeare, like the French doing it in French. But I don't know a lot of Americans who have really made a point to do what you're doing. And that's awesome. It's so cool that it's like spanning internationally, but that it's also somewhat rooted here. I would love to see more work like that happening in this country.
Yeah, and well, there is a tradition. I mean, again, obviously I've mentioned my grandmother. There is a real tradition of translating Shakespeare into Arabic. Like he very much, oh, I was doing research for my MLit thesis, and like the first performance of Shakespeare in the Middle East was in the 1600s. Now it was by a crew of like it was by a crew of, I think, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think it was like members of the East India Company, like while they were in Yemen. But like Shakespeare's been in the Middle East for a really long time. And there are, oh my gosh, what's his? Khalil Mutran is, I think, like the most consistent, like the most famous translator of Shakespeare into Arabic. And if I am remembering this correctly, I believe he's Lebanese, and then but he worked in Egypt, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. But like he did his Othello like really famous in the Middle East, and Adham was telling me like sort of the way that like like referring to Romeo and Juliet as sort of like colloquial. Like you'll sort of be like, okay, Romeo, to someone who's like really, they have the same thing, at least from what Adham was telling me in Egypt with Othello. They'll be like, okay, Othello, because of the way that Matron portrayed Othello as like this noble Arab hero. So there's a long history of translating Shakespeare into Arabic, and it's just like it feels like it hasn't ever made its way over to the West at all. And so I'm just like, we're doing a new version. We're not doing necessarily like Matran's translations, but adding to that history and trying to have a bridge there.
It's really amazing work. I'm so excited that you're doing it and looking forward. Like, what do you see is the future for this translation and like maybe more question mark?
Yes. So I sort of mentioned, so originally this last summer, Guy and I were hoping to be able to do sort of more of a workshop with like 7 actors of Romeo and Juliet, but we weren't able to do it. And so we pivoted a little, and I went to Prague, and I was gonna, as a pre-show to the PSC student summer intensive production of Hamlet, I was gonna do like a monologue of Juliet in Arabic and English. And it was at the Estates Theater in Prague, which is where Mozart premiered Don Giovanni. And so I got that email from him, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to do that. But I was losing my mind. I was objectively like, yeah, that's really cool. But like there was something that I was like, oh God. But what ended up happening was, because we've been posting about it and all of that, was there were 2 students who were there, who were planning to go that summer anyway, that when I got there connected with me because they're also Arab American, and they had seen that this project was happening, and they were interested in like talking about it and possibly being a part of it in the future. And I mentioned it to Guy, and he was like, well, why don't we just add them into Juliet in a few weeks? And so Hind and Stevie became, which I now, they're my other Juliets. What ended up happening was we extended it a little. It was about 3 minutes long. It was all 3 of us. We were all Juliet, and it sort of felt like you were inside Juliet's brain, because it wasn't like we each did a monologue of her. We all shared all of it, and it felt like, I don't know, it was really, I jokingly refer to it as the Juliet multiverse. But it like, I think about like, and this sort of happened while I was putting the script together, but like the scene where she finds out that Tybalt's is dead and Romeo didn't, and Romeo's banished, it was like she was arguing with herself, which is sort of what's happening in that scene. And it went over really well, and we got a really good reaction out of it. And so this fall, we expanded it to what is now about 20 minutes, and it's called What's in a Name, which is still 3 Juliets, but then we also added in Lady Capulet. So it became, who is also one of my professors, Doreen Bechtel, who is half Lebanese. And so it's still, but she was just Lady Capulet, and like Juliets were still the 3 Juliets. And it's because of this sort of like happy accident that Hind and Stevie happened to be in Prague at the same time, we've created something that is a little different and still showcases the Arabic and our identities on stage, but has become a slightly more travelable, if that's a word, version of this show. And that is also a little different. Like, yes, Shakespeare in Arabic is already different, but having 3 Juliets is really different. And it's fun because it's, in that version, we trade off who Lady Capulet can see. And we also filled in as like Lord Capulet and Paris. And then I slid off the stage at one point and became Romeo. And it was a balance of like us playing other characters, but also the idea was sort of you're really seeing the play through Juliet's eyes. And so like her, specifically the sonnet, we really leaned into it with Good Pilgrim of like recounting this meet cute with your friends at a slumber party. And it was just silly and fun. Yeah, and also sort of like the terror of that, of like the I'll drag thee on a hurdle thither with Lord Capulet. We traded off being like Lord Capulet in different sections. So there was like no escaping it. So that was never planned. It just happened, and that's become a version of this project that we're really exploring more and more, and it's changing sort of each time we do it, which is really cool.
That's fascinating. I love Juliet just like as a character. I love like a deep dive into her psyche. That's amazing.
Yeah, and we had a Dr. Kerwin did a review of it because we did that for the Blackfriars conference this last November. And the way he put it, which I think kind of I agree with, he was like, it made Juliet, who I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, Juliet is already a very complex character, and it made like the complexity and like range of emotion that a teenage girl can have too complex for one actor to portray. So, and it's what I personally love about like any iteration that we've had of it, whether it's like What's in a Name, the Three Juliets, or like the full stage reading, is yes, it is showcasing like Arabic and Arab artists on stage, but it also still is the story. Like Juliet Capulet is still Juliet Capulet. She just also happens to be Arab and to be bilingual. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, before we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts?
This is my, like, this whole thing is just, it's my baby and it means the world to me. And I'm just so happy that people are excited about it and want to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was stoked when it first popped up on my feed. I was already following you before that because you are a fantastic content creator just in general.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I'm so glad you agreed to do this. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can follow Fawzia and Bulls with the Bard at the handles either on your screen or in the description. And tune in next week as we chat with Charlene V. Smith about Margaret. Until then, bye all.
A thousand sighs to save. Oh, lay me where sad true lover never find my grave to weep there.